Viewpoint is discussing relations with Spain with the leader of the opposition, and you can continue to send in emails on viewpoint@gbc.gi or call 200 79810. We've got a couple for you. Both of the ones that I'm going to read now are in a similar theme, so let me get through them both before answering, if you would, Mr. Feetham. This is from Lewis, who says that he completely disagrees with you. Spain can never be trusted. The only way to deal with her is at the end of a gun. That's the only thing that the Argentinians understood, and it's the only thing that Spain understands. A strong viewpoint there from Lewis. And if I can go to Paul's, Paul says, if you concede that a future Spanish government may tear up any future agreement as the present one effectively has with Córdoba, isn't it a waste of time and energy investing in dialogue? You say the alternative is doing nothing. Isn't this preferable to raising false expectations? A question from Paul.
No, I don't agree. I think that in politics you've got to have a positive vision. You've got to be optimistic. There is always going to be a risk, and it's been shown because of the changing government in Spain with the PP replacing the PSOE, that there's going to be a different policy in relation to Gibraltar. Look, we used to go round the estates at election time saying in Spanish, in Llanito, agárrense ustedes que vienen curva, because we could foresee that there was going to be a change of policy from the PP towards Gibraltar. I don't think that ought to change our own policy in terms of our commitment to dialogue. Gibraltar has always got to maintain the high moral ground. Gibraltar and Gibraltarian politicians have always got to try and look for solutions. Going into a bunker, arming yourself, that's not a solution at all. What we've got to do is basically always be prepared to extend our hand and say, right, I've got my position, you've got yours, let's talk, try and see, not on sovereignty, I'm not talking about sovereignty, I'm not talking about those issues that are important, those red lines that I've spoken about very often, on issues that are of mutual benefit to businesses, on issues that are of mutual benefit to citizens. I think that Gibraltar has got to do it. And just simply because there's a risk that the PP government is going to breach agreements is not a reason why we ought to go back on that policy.
To reassure people like Lewis, perhaps you can elaborate on what your red lines are and what you understand Gibraltar's to be at present, the Gibraltar governments. But first we've got Clive Edwards on the line who'd like to put a viewpoint or ask a question perhaps of the Leader of the Opposition. Good evening, Clive.
Good evening. Mr. Feetham, I'm English and I came here 47 years ago with no opinion of the Spanish problem. After 47 years of being here, and now I've become a Gibraltarian person, I think that you can talk to Spain until you're blue in the face and you will get absolutely nowhere. You cannot trust the Spanish. We have the La Línea people coming over here working, and if you spend any time in your La Línea, you will know they talk behind your back. This is a waste of your energy and a waste of your time.
OK, thank you for your viewpoint, Clive. Mr. Feetham, what would you say to that?
Well, look, I respect Clive's opinion. I don't agree with it. I think that there is always going to be a risk. There is always going to be a risk that agreements that you reach might not be adhered to by a subsequent government, as in this case, the PP supplanting the PSOE. I don't think that is a reason to change our political philosophy, and our political philosophy has got to be one that basically is a mature one, is an intelligent one, and is one that essentially says, let's sit down and let's talk on issues that are of mutual benefit, not on sovereignty, not on jurisdiction, not on control of waters, airspace and territory. Not interested in talking about that. But there is an awful lot...
Those are the red lines.
Those are the red lines. There's an awful lot that we can talk about, and indeed, you know, the Córdoba agreements were beneficial to Gibraltar, they were beneficial as well to Spain. That the PP government hasn't adhered to them, I don't think that's a good enough reason. And indeed, think about it. Look, there could be a change of government in Spain. The PSOE might win the next election. Podemos might hold the balance of power at the next election. What we should be doing is going to Spain, talking to these politicians, talking to these political parties, building bridges and making them see that actually there's a lot that can be done for the ordinary citizen on both sides of the border. That's the positive vision. That's what we've got to be doing. Not just simply say, well, they can't be trusted, we're wasting our time, we're turning our backs. That, unfortunately, is not my way. It's not the GSD's way, and we're not prepared. We're not prepared to just simply countenance that possibility.
I listened to your speech in Ronda earlier this week, and we'll hopefully put it online for our viewers to watch on our YouTube channel in its entirety in the next 24 hours. Your message in many ways resonates with comments made by Mr. Picardo in the past. Is this deliberate?
No, look, I've been going to Spain now for a year and a half. So, and indeed, I think that in the last year or so, Mr. Picardo has gone to Spain once. I think Algeciras, it was an unfortunate incident. He hasn't been to Spain to deliver a speech since. We've been consistent in our message that we delivered in Spain. I don't think the government has been as consistent. The government's position now is about dialogue. I think he's softened his position from the comments and the statements that he was making last year. For example, with respect, Jonathan.
In fairness to Mr. Picardo,
he has never.
Let me just say very quickly that in fairness to Mr. Picardo, he has never said that he does not seek dialogue.
No, but what you cannot do. Look, what you cannot do is on the one hand seek dialogue, and on the other compare Spain at the United Nations to North Korea. You cannot do that. Why can't you do that? Because what you do by comparing Spain to North Korea, even if you think about it, is because, even if you think privately that it's justified, is because you're going to offend not only the Pepe government. Forget about the Pepe government. You know, I couldn't care less whether we offend the Pepe government. I criticize the Pepe government every single time that I go to Spain. But you are going to offend an awful lot of Spaniards who have a view of Gibraltar different from the Pepe and are supportive of Gibraltar and critical of the Pepe governments. You cannot have those inconsistent policies, and therefore there's been an inconsistency in message. He, in my view, Mr. Picardo, has softened his approach over the last a few months, and he's come into our territory. That's my view, and that's my honest expression of opinion in relation to the government's policy in this area.
I'd like to bring up something that you said on tobacco earlier this week in Spain. But before I do that, let me just go to Twitter, where Kevin has said, while he is all for good relations and preferably for good PR in Spain, there is a false Spanish media style of reporting that is very damaging to Gibraltar. And I think Kevin is asking, would the opposition legally challenge that? Would the GSD legally challenge that if you were in government?
Well, look, if there is a legal challenge to be made because there is a cause of action, in other words, it can be properly be brought. There is injury on the part of Gibraltar, and it stands good prospects of success. Well, you know, I've often said in the past that actually we shouldn't be closing our doors to legal action, particularly in Europe. But that's why I think that going to Spain, for example, in Ronda, I not only delivered a speech in the Cultural Institute, but there was a press conference with all the major TV channels and radio channels of the region that were there. And that is a platform that you can use in order to debunk a lot of the myths about Gibraltar. Because it's not only about going there and trying to persuade people that the policy of the Pepe is wrong and having a positive vision. Those are very important. It's also about debunking common myths about Gibraltar, about our finance centre, and other myths that we all know about. Now, that gives you a platform to do that. That's why it's so important not to effectively just simply turn your backs to Spain, but take your message there. Difficult as it is, but take your message there.
Okay, well, I'd like to ask you about tobacco. You generally don't seem to get along with Mr. Picardo, I think it's fair to say. So I was particularly interested to hear you, Mr. Feetham, praise him in Ronda for his anti-tobacco measures. And I think we've got a short clip that we can play, very short clip.
¿Que hay un problema con el tabaco? Sí, la verdad es de que, mira, el señor Picardo ha hecho más para tratar de incrementar el precio del tabaco que nosotros hicimos en gobierno por 16 años. Yo fui ministro de Justicia en Gibraltar, 4 años.
So what we heard you say there, Mr. Feetham, for anybody who doesn't speak Spanish, is that there is a problem with tobacco across the Gibraltar frontier, yes, and you credited Mr. Picardo for doing more in 3 years to raise the price of tobacco than the GSD did in 16 years.
Well, look, what am I supposed to do if I go to Spain? Criticise the Gibraltar government? Of course not. I'm there to defend Gibraltar. I mean, you know, I have been pilloried on social media and elsewhere by the GSLP machinery over a very long, protracted period of time, a very personalised, targeted campaign, saying that I'm soft on Spain and that I'm going there to do the Gibraltar government down. That is not what I do. I defend Gibraltar, and if I have to defend the Gibraltar government, I will defend the Gibraltar government. And I thought that the honest answer to that question is that Mr. Picardo has done more than we did in relation to this particular issue. Look,
So you're trying to
there
put
was a problem. There was a problem. There was not discounting the problem that was inherited in 1996. That is historical. But the reality is that he has increased the prices of tobacco on 4 separate occasions.
And you credit that. You
of course
praise
I
him
do.
for that.
Of course I praise him, and of course I credit him. Because it is important when you go there to also make people realise what your government is doing. And at the end of the day, Mr. Picardo and I may be political rivals and we may be political opponents, but he is still my chief minister and his government is still my government.
But nevertheless, you still think that Mr. Picardo has mishandled relations with Spain in his 3 years?
And I have said that from the very beginning. I believe that he has mishandled. Look, whether it would have made a difference or not, that is a different question altogether. But I do think that it hasn't helped the situation. He has walked into very often situations where perhaps I think that my party in government would not have walked into situations.
Such as?
Well, look, I've said it before and I repeat it again today. We would have not done away with the 1999 agreement without having something to take its place, for example. So we went from a situation of aquí no se pesca and we've got to respect the rule of law, to, and that's why we are tearing up the 1999 agreement, to a situation where it's a free-for-all in British Gibraltar territorial waters.
You're talking
and Spanish fishermen are fishing with nets every single day.
And they're
look, I prefer to be consistent.
They're accompanied by Spanish state vessels as well.
Well, they were accompanied by Spanish state vessels, but now they're coming in unaccompanied. And the law appears to be not to be enforced. Look, I prefer to be consistent from the very beginning so that people in Gibraltar know where I stand and I have consistency of approach than saying one thing and then doing another.
We're seeing pictures on air in recent months. This is just some home footage. It's just one example of a Spanish fishing boat coming into Gibraltar using nets, having been visited by the Guardia Civil, perhaps receiving some reassurances that it's nearby if anything happens, having been visited thereafter by the RGP and continuing to fish with apparent impunity. Do you think that the RGP is failing in its duties there?
If I were Chief Minister of Gibraltar, I would be asking very serious questions about what is happening in British Gibraltar territorial waters today in terms of enforcement. And I would be asking,
the
absolutely,
police?
Absolutely. Look, it's a nonsense. It's a nonsense to just simply say enforcement is a matter of for the police and I am not getting involved. Let me just give you an example. Assume, for example, that there is a spate of crime in Gibraltar, that there is speeding down Linewall Road every single day in full view of the police, and the police did absolutely nothing about it. Do you think that politicians in that kind of situation would say, it's nothing to do with me, enforcement is for the police? They would be asking serious questions. And that's why, I am not too sure that there is honesty, quite frankly, as to what is happening behind the scenes. And
so
I would be asking serious questions. But look,
Mr. Feetham,
but remember,
if I may, you would be asking the Commissioner of Police, or you would like to have an honest answer from the Commissioner of Police as to whether he has been under political pressure from Mr. Picardo.
Well, look, I don't know whether he's been under political pressure or he hasn't been under political pressure. But I do think Mr. Picardo to get involved. But I do think that the fact that the police have done nothing about this in such a blatant way, I can't for one moment imagine that there hasn't been conversations about this between the Chief Minister of the day and the Commissioner of Police. What those conversations have been, I don't know, because I haven't been privy. All I can say is what I would do if I were Chief Minister. I would ask serious questions about the current situation, because I don't believe that the current situation is sustainable.
But what does that mean? That you would call the Commissioner of Police and say...
Absolutely, and ask why is this law being ignored?
And did that used to happen under Mr. Caruana?
But we had the
or as yourself as Minister for Justice?
There was a 1999 agreement in place.
But isn't the police supposed to be independent of the government?
Absolutely, the police are supposed to be independent of the government, yes. And in a normal situation, governments don't interfere with enforcement, I accept that. But when you have blatant disregard of our laws, are you seriously saying to me that if there was a spate of crime in Gibraltar and there was a lack of enforcement, that you as a politician with a duty to people in the street would not be asking questions? Of course you would be asking questions. I can't tell the police, you've got to arrest ships. Of course I don't. You've got to confiscate nets. Of course I wouldn't do that, and I can't do that. But I would ask the question, well, why is it being enforced in this particular way? And then, take it from there. But our policy, but with respect, we have offered an alternative from the very beginning. Our policy from the very beginning, and I was very severely criticised about this, because a lot of actually the government and indeed its machinery criticised our policy for being a euphemism for Spanish nets, when I said from the very beginning what we've got to do is what we've planned long term. We didn't do it when we were in government, but we planned it, which was to change the law in order to allow fishing during certain times of the year with EU-compliant nets. So, for example, January to June, and outlaw fishing from July to December, and with certain types of nets. That's the law that we would have introduced. Now, it appears that the government regulated as well, so properly licensed. Now, that is the policy, it appears to be the policy of the government. The government haven't introduced those regulations. I don't know why. I suspect, actually, that the government don't want to do it this side of a general election, which doesn't appear to me to be very politically honest, because if you've got a policy, what you don't do is not go ahead with it because it's going to cost you votes. At least we've been honest with the people of Gibraltar for the last 3 years.
Well, the answer when GBC put this to the Environment Minister, Dr. John Cortes, not too long ago, when the marine regulations were introduced, is that fishing with nets is currently illegal under the Nature Protection Act, and therefore they don't need to regulate for it because it's not permitted.
That is absolute nonsense. Of course it's illegal, but the government amended the Nature Protection Act in October, 29th of October of last year, in order to allow for regulations to be introduced to allow for fishing with EU-compliant nets. In other words, the government's policy, announced by the Chief Minister, actually both on GBC and indeed, I believe, in answer to questions that I've asked in Parliament, has been, yes, we intend to change this law in order to allow for regulated fishing. What we're not going to do is be pressurised in terms of a timetable for changing the law. So to the extent that the Minister for the Environment was trying to give the impression that it's not the government's policy to change the law in order to allow for fishing with EU-compliant nets, he is not being politically honest. I'm sorry.
We are talking about fishing with nets because, of course, it is a hot potato, political hot potato, and the cause for some political aggro between Gibraltar and Spain. And I'll ask you one more question on that, at least, and that is to follow through your logic that it is completely sensible for a politician to ask questions of the Commissioner of Police if the law is being disregarded blatantly, as you say it is. So if we follow through that logic, what you are suggesting is that the Chief Minister has told the Commissioner of Police, Mr. Yomi, not to arrest Spanish fishermen.
Well, I don't know whether the Chief Minister has said or hasn't said that to the Commissioner of Police. Only the Chief Minister can answer that, and he has denied any kind of influence over the Commissioner of Police. What I am saying is that it is a very odd way of enforcing a law that is there. I mean, fishing with nets is outlawed in British Gibraltar territorial waters, and you've shown a clip during this programme that shows that it's not being enforced. Now, in the same way as the laws have got to be respected, not only in mainland Gibraltar, they've got to be respected as well out at sea. And I would certainly have that conversation with the Commissioner of Police and ask why it's not being enforced. I mean, it's as simple as that. And then we would take things from there. The reality is that this situation cannot continue much longer. Otherwise, we might as well just simply repeal the Nature Protection Act and say, look, we're not interested in regulating fishing with nets in British Gibraltar territorial waters, because we're allowing Spanish fishermen to come in, to fish with nets, and therefore, let's all be honest, we're not interested in regulating this particular area. But if we are interested in doing so because we are interested in protecting the environment, well, then you've got to take tough decisions. I've said, let's allow fishing with EU-compliant nets. So go from a total prohibition to some sensible, regulated form of regulation of fishing with nets. But if you do that, if you're effectively making the law more permissive, you are going to have to enforce the law. That's otherwise there is absolutely no respect for the law at all.
We're running out of time, Mr. Feetham. I'd like to ask you, with elections on the horizon in Gibraltar, in the UK and in Spain over the coming year or so, how optimistic are you that there will be some sort of talks, perhaps ad hoc talks? And when?
I doubt very much that you're going to have any significant talks prior to the general election in Spain, in the UK, and prior to the general election in Gibraltar. That's my honest answer to that question. But look, I have heard it said that there are some people that are optimistic that there are going to be talks in the new year. Personally, I can't see it happen. I hope so, because dialogue is the only way forward. I hope so. I hope that it happens. But I can't see that it's going to be happening prior to a general election in Spain, UK and Gibraltar.
Have you spoken to the Chief Minister about this, and do you have an inside track, as it were?
No, not at all. I mean, I, as you know, was briefed once or twice on Privy Council terms by the Chief Minister in September of last year, when I declared effectively a moratorium on political activity post the laying of the blocks, because Gibraltar was coming under a lot of pressure, and I thought that it was important to give the government of the day the political space in order to deal with the crisis. He briefed me on those on two occasions. Once political activities resumed and were back to normal, he never briefed me again.
Do you think that's correct, or would you prefer to have briefings?
I would prefer for him to. I would prefer to have a formal structure in which the Chief Minister and the leader of the opposition perhaps meet every quarter or every 2 months and discuss face-to-face issues of the day, important issues affecting Gibraltar. I am very much in favour of that. I am very much in favour of having dialogue with the Chief Minister. A lot of my shadow ministers have very good relations and very good dialogue with their counterparts on the other side. I have very good friends on the government side. A government minister came to have dinner at my house 2 weeks ago. So, quite frankly, it ought to be possible to leave aside political differences and do what is best for Gibraltar. And the Chief Minister and the leader of the opposition have got to set an example. But, I can't force Mr. Picardo to basically have those meetings with me.
You have actively tried to engage with Spanish politicians and debating groups and others over the past year or so. Do you think the Chief Minister should be doing the same? And would you do so if you were, should there become should you become Chief Minister at some point?
Well, I think it is important. I think it's important that you have and try to build bridges and have dialogue with every single political party in Spain. That is important because it allows you to have an understanding with people. Very often it allows you as well to put a name to a face, to develop a personal relationship with people that might be important. For example, if you have good relations with the PSOE at a very high level and there is a change of government in Spain, and you know people personally, you can pick up the phone if there is a flare-up, for example, and actually talk to that person. Say, look, this is happening. What's going on? That's important. You can't underestimate what those kind of how beneficial those kind of relationships are in business, in all aspects of life. Politics is no different.
Can you tell us? You said you've had meetings with various parties. Can you tell us who you've met with and what level?
I have met with every single with members of every single political party in Spain. Look,
Podemos?
not Podemos, sorry, and I made this point in the in answer to questions in Ronda, that I'm in the process of writing to Podemos because it's important. Podemos is going to be critical because Podemos potentially has the balance of power in Spain. They don't have a firm policy in relation to Gibraltar, so we've got the opportunity there to basically influence Podemos policy, and therefore if they are a minority, a junior partner in a government, therefore to influence the government of the day. But I have had, I have met with MPs of virtually every single party. I've participated in debates. I mean, I participated in a debate in Valladolid, for example, where there was a member of the PP executive. And let me tell you one thing, that not everybody within the PP agrees with the policy of Margallo, not at all, because people are not stupid and they can see that Margallo's policy towards Gibraltar is achieving absolutely nothing from a Spanish point of view, let alone from a Gibraltarian point of view.
Arguably, it's achieving a smokescreen, or serving as a smokescreen to other political scandals.
Well, perhaps. I mean, perhaps that is the whole objective of it. To provide smoke screens in order to divert attention from internal politics. Somehow, I think that the problem with Mr. Margallo is that he is, in many ways, a political dinosaur, and he harks back to the past, and he has this policy towards Gibraltar out of some misplaced conviction, and that is the problem. That as long as perhaps Margallo is there in place, it's very difficult to engage with somebody like Margallo for those reasons.
Well, some commentators would say that he's been very successful in doing exactly what he wanted to do with Gibraltar, which is divert attention away from, as I said, the Barcenas
I cannot
scandal.
Accept. Well, look,
else.
That may be so. I cannot accept that that successful politics is sacrificing and putting in jeopardy the lives and the livelihoods of 10,000 of your own citizens and hundreds of your own businesses. I don't accept that is successful
You've
politics.
made that point. Let's give the last question of the evening to Tony, who's asking you on Twitter, what do you think will be the final outcome of Fabian Picardo's relations with Spain? I suppose he's saying how, come next year, this time next year, what will the relations with Spain be like?
Well, I don't know. It depends on who is in government in Spain, and therefore what the policy is going to be in relation to Gibraltar. The panorama changes completely if you have the PSOE. Hopefully, it will change if Podemos is a junior partner. I think that they're potentially more susceptible to a different message than some of the more established parties. My concern has been, from the very beginning, in the way that Fabian handled relations with Spain, that in order to defend Gibraltar's interests, you have to be a valid interlocutor. In other words, you have got to be able to go to Spain and to speak to people without people sort of thinking, well, look, I'm not interested because of some of the statements that you've made in the past which are offensive. That's not intelligent in my view, and that is my concern. It always has been. That's why I am gratified, I have to say, to see him softening his position from the position of last year, and his speech in the United Nations this time round was a far, far more measured speech, because what is required is intelligence, and what is required is measured speech rather than making statements that might appeal, for example, to Simi Herbert. And I don't criticise that from her point of view. Well, look, that may be justified, but I don't think that's intelligent defence of Gibraltar.
Next week, the Chief Minister will be here to counter your points, but I'm afraid for tonight, that's all we've got time for. Mr. Feetham, thank you for your time.
Well, thank you very much, and I look forward to next week as well.
Next week, live on Viewpoint, the Chief Minister will debate with the Leader of the Opposition the results of a poll by GBC exactly 3 years after the general election. So make sure you tune in at the same time next week. But for tonight, from all of us here at Broadcasting House, many thanks for watching and good night.